But let's talk a little bit more about arousal and try to get back to that a little bit, a little less about reactivity, because there are dogs that aren't reactive but have high levels of arousal. You know, I can't tell you how many dogs come to classes, and we spoke about it a little bit in the play podcast we did, but it's like, you know, where someone, they can't play with the dog because the dog's getting so aroused, they're jumping up and they're grabbing, and so there are sometimes when people talk, or maybe just someone comes, you know, like you have guests over and the dog's going crazy with the excitement and the arousal. So like there are situations which people struggle with that, which aren't like reactivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like my strategy for that is I need to be able to bring that arousal to similar level. However we wanna get there. Right? I wanna be
You mean for something you control?
Yeah. So if I can bring the arousal to similar level via play, that's fine, right? Via social play, that's fine, right? So, and then I can practice something what we call impulse control, right? Impulse control is not about making the dog calmer. Like this is where we are getting it wrong very often. Like there was someone recently that, you know, like with tiny puppies, we like practicing impulse control, and I'm like always was like, hey, let's create the pose first before we will create impulse control. We're like, if the dog doesn't really yet care about the toys or isn't that motivated about the food, then we are starting practicing impulse control. Like, what is the point, right? Where other things from life will be much more excitable, and that will less likely translate for those situations, right? So the first thing is, I want to be able to bring the arousal level to similar to the situation that I have problem with, right? And then I can practice impulse control or teach the dog to think during those situations, right? Usually by giving them what they want, right? So again, like as we discussed with the heel work, I can build the drive. I can, use a lot of messages, like make my dog boiling because they want the toy that badly, right? And then ask the dog to heel, give the dog the ball, right? Then if I practice that, if my dog gets excited about the presence of other dogs and I will ask him for heel work, I will be much more successful with it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of go through like what sometimes, I never really hear people use this term anymore, but people talk a lot about proofing, where it's like, you teach the behavior and then you proof it to higher levels of distraction more and more and more. But then, of course, part of that, which sometimes doesn't get regarded as like you want as much motivation for the behavior as possible, because that makes the proofing process like a lot easier, because the dog's not choosing between something that kind of sucks and something that's really, really good.
Yeah. So to give you another example, like one dog really comes to my mind, reactive, out of frustration, German Shepherd that I had in residential stay, and he was getting excited about like really boiling about, even the dog was in the busy place, like channeling that into heel work, like focus heel work. That was the way to go, because I could, within like very short amount of time, I could take the dog, for example, to shop to all the places. And when the dog was like, oh my God, I'm like, then the dog was like channeling everything into focus heel work, and he would be offering it, right? And from there, like one specific situation comes to my mind when I was like in the shop, and he was like, it was like quite a lot for the dog to take. And then like really we channeled everything into the focus heel work, so I could walk around the shop, do the shopping, like take the dog out. And then, in that kind of scenario, I could live life with the dog, and I could take the dog to the shop like on daily basis. And over time, that became boring. And over time, the dog became calmer. But the first line of action wasn't like, hey, stay calm, right? Just be calm.
Yeah, I'm remembering a thread on Facebook that went really viral where someone misunderstood. Someone had obviously watched a lot of Instagram and thought that the focused heel work was something that people did for their entire walk. and it went a little bit viral.
Oh my god!
So for anyone that doesn't understand,
that's why I don't read. That's why I don't read Facebook.
Yeah,
like there is something about like I'm becoming more and more obsessed with focus skill work and the benefits that are coming from it. Like first of all, I don't want to diverse too much from original topic, but it just built connection, and as it says on the teen focus, right? Like with reactive dogs, like if the dog is looking at you, they less likely will be looking at the trigger, which is less confrontational. That is the difficult word. So less likely the dog will react. With the sensitive dogs, I can like, hey, walk with me, look at me. You don't have to challenge that word. Trust me, you're gonna be fine, right? But yeah, like I can channel all the arousal, depends where it's coming from, into the behavior, and most and foremost, it looks fucking cool, isn't it? Right? So
sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I remember one of the other games. I remember when I first kind of started going down this rabbit hole. The first time I was like really inexperienced, and the first time I ever had any issues with this, it was with a couple that had got they kind of accidentally got a working line Doberman, and they were just not ready for it whatsoever. And I think he was from IGP lines, and he was a really, really cool dog, but he would get very aroused very easily. If, for example, I would take him on a walk and I would stop, so maybe someone starts talking to me, straight away he's jumping up, he's grabbing, and he was really big for like grabbing your arms and all this kind of stuff. Someone comes into the house, same thing. He would very quickly like get very over aroused. So that was like probably my first like learning curve for learning how to resolve that. And I remember one of the games that someone recommended to me, which I still play about with today, was like play with him and then withhold the toy, wait for the sit or something like that. Then we start the game again. And in the beginning, you do it at like low arousal, and then as a dog, you kind of deliberately are taking the dog higher and higher and higher and higher. And I think it was just like one of those games that the idea was to try to teach the dog to be able to stay able to think, right, in that kind of situation. And I found that really helpful when I was kind of first starting to deal with
you can apply that concept into like in so many different ways, right? You can, if your dog is jumping on you when you are coming back from work, like make the dog like do the social game. Yeah. Make the dog crazy. Then I prefer ask the dog rather than wait for offering the behavior, because like if my dog is like excited and then I'm telling the dog, hey, figure it out, that can be long wait with some dogs, right? So I prefer to cue the dog. Another reason for it is I want the dog to also listen to my guidance in those situations, right?
You do want to fade the cue a little bit. Sometimes you want to fade the cue out though. Like, for example, I do that as part of teaching the dog not to jump up generally. So I kind of teach not jumping up in a few different ways. And one of the ways that we play the game is like when you go into the greeting, I hold the dog back a little bit. And it's the same thing. Like in the beginning, super low arousal. The person that's being the distraction is not really doing anything interesting. The moment the dog sits or turns back, it's like shaping. It's like, yes, good, right? And then the person gets more and more and more distracting until I can get the dog to the point where no matter how exciting that person is, the dog's sitting and ideally focused on me. And in that situation, I can understand wanting to start with a cue, but I want to fade the cue out eventually because I want the dog to just immediately start offering that when I go into a greeting situation.
Thinking about that specific situation, that makes total sense. What I feel is, if, for example, through play, I want to teach my dog impulse control and I want to translate that to other situations, right? And in other sort of scenarios that, the sit might be good or the heel might be good 100%. Or the recall might be good. Like for me, it is a little bit like faster way if I will cue the dog, but
You kind of
also
want both, right?
in different scenarios, I will want different thing from the dog, right? So I want like first thing, I want my dog to listen, and in some cases, of course, we wanna like it's huge benefit if the dog will come up with that idea by themselves. Like I'm not saying it's not, but like if it goes for purely practical approach, I prefer to cue the dog.
I think there's value in both. I think I would do both because it's like, it's exactly what you said. You want the dog to understand, to be able to respond to cues at high level of arousal. But there are also sometimes situations where I don't want to have to talk to the dog. I want them to understand the environment is a cue to go into this behavior. Another one of those situations I really like, everyone does settle training with settle mats. And I understand, it's nice visual cue. It's easy for people. And maybe it's just me being a dog trainer, but I really like teaching my dog when I sit down, that is a signal to settle. So sometimes if I'm teaching a dog this, you go on a walk, you come across a park bench, you sit down, and in the beginning, the dog doesn't know what to do. They're kind of wandering around and they're just being restless. The moment, then you just start shaping a settle, so you start rewarding the sits, you start rewarding the downs. Then I start teaching the dog when, like, the dog starts to learn when I sit down, that is a signal that you should begin to settle. So I like stuff like that. I do really like environmental cues because there is something, this is probably just, maybe this is just my own, like, elitism or something, but it's like there is something that is kind of feels purer about it. Where it's like I don't have to say anything to the dog. They understand this situation is a signal to do this. And I don't know, that appeals to me.
Yeah. For example, something what I did with my dog, because he liked other dogs way too much, because like my previous Malinois was like fucking gangster. He would like to murder all of the dogs. So I over-socialize my dog. So I prefer to push the balance into that way than have like any sort of aggression issues because of my previous experience. So my dog loves other dogs. But then I was dealing with, he would be like first one to develop reactivity based on frustration, right? But what I did is I conditioned the cue that the presence of the dog means recall.
Yes.
And I was like religious about that. This is one of my rules, one of the 3 rules for the recall. Like when my dog will look at the distraction, I will recall my dog. So later on, the presence of the distraction will mean the behavior. And at the beginning, I will cue the dog, but later on, I want that to happen automatically. And to this day, if I'm like on the phone, like whatever in the woods, and my dog is usually running free, if he will suddenly come back to me and go between my legs, that means there is a dog somewhere on site, right? So I love it as well, and you can apply that even to reactive dogs, to any sort of other situation.
Yep.
Another thing. When I open the fridge, that is key to my dog to go on the bed. So I'm not dealing with begging at the table, because like I'm opening the fridge and my dog will run on the bed. Recently, that has changed with the presence of the second Malinois
competition.
In the competition, I posted recently a photo where like I opened the fridge and there are 2 heads in the fridge, almost. Yeah. But at this point, it's not a problem. But you can get quite creative with it. It should be almost like instinctive action. Like when you see the red light, you stop the car. We don't think about that. We don't contemplate that. It's just instinctive, like reaction to the red light. And if there is something very important for someone, like for me, control around other dogs is very, very important, right? I don't let my dog to interact with the strange dogs. So
no, I fucking love this conversation. This is good.
The presence of the dog means come back to me. And that makes my life so easy, and I can give all the freedom I want.
Yeah, I did this a lot with Onyx when she was younger, because one of my favorite walks to do was Psychopath. But of course, you get bikes, and it's quite a narrow path. And so I started teaching her that the bike is the signal to come back to me. And initially I was doing the off-lead healing, but very often she just started offering the walking in middle. So I was like, oh, that's kind of fine. That works for me. You know? So she does that quite a lot. But yeah, I love that stuff.
Yeah, like walking to meadow, like I had the experience with my dog where when I lived in Devon, the amount of the heel work or like focused healing in real life was, or any sort of healing in the real life was very minimal because I was living on the countryside. So, you know.
You didn't see people?
I didn't, you know, I seen people or dogs, but those interactions were very, very brief. So, for example, there was a horse rider, like whatever, jogger. I was calling my dog to the meadow. Like we were walking past a couple meters, then the person is gone. Then I would give him a free time, right? But when I moved where I live right now, and I happened to be in in the middle of the town with my dog, and my dog wouldn't be able to walk, like in any other place because I wasn't bothered to teach the heel work then, and I had to walk for like 2 miles in the middle position, and that was not comfortable at all.
How do you when you have a client that lives in a more of a city location, do you adjust your training at all to because like some of my clients, they live in the city, you know, and maybe they're obviously we can talk about the pros and the cons of this, but maybe their local walk is a city park where there's just people and dogs everywhere. Do you have any adjustments that you tend to make for people where they're seeing dogs and people far more regularly?
So the adjustment would be pretty like straightforward. I like to condition behavior with the place. So, and this is something what I later did with my dog, like pavement means heel work. Like there is nothing else to do on the pavement than walk to heel. Or of course not focus heel, more relaxed one. But I want that behavior. Or like when you are going to the park, this is pretty much like heel work is very practical. In the park or on the fields, like recall, right? So I like to just link the place with the behaviors, but also with kind of emotions as well. Like if you will go to the pub, you will feel automatically a little bit different than versus if you will go, I don't know, to the church, regardless if you're religious or not, right? So I like to adjust this way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do equipment cues for that. So,
Equipment cues as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so like for me, if the dog is on short lead and a collar, that means you're walking to my side.
I just recorded like a couple videos with the puppy that I trained. I wanted to post that.
You know, what's interesting about that, and I don't know if you'll tell me off for this, Alex, but with Onyx, I was super religious about that in the early stages. When you're on the lead and the collar, you're walking to my side. As she started to improve, I got more flexible. So now it's like I have on verbal as well. So I can say, okay. And that means like she can kind of explore a little more. And then if I say slow, that means get to my side. Or with me, that means come to my side.
The difference is that, you know, we like I will give different advice to the dog trainer.
I didn't start like that though. Right? I started with the super religious collar means you're on my side.
Yeah. So, for example, like with the pet owners, I will like give them tools, like swap around, like collar harness, or, you know, like 2 collars, right? But you can have it on the cues, like on the verbal cues. Like with my dog, like he can pull or like on the same equipment as he would be walking to heel, especially since like vast majority of the walks, he doesn't even have a collar at the moment. So,
do you teach your dog at all the difference between pavements and roads? Because I know some people do this. Some people, obviously, there are many people that they teach the dog to sit at the curb. But beyond that, like sometimes people teach the dog, you can't step onto the road without some form of permission. Do you bother with that or not really?
Well, if I look at the life I'm living with my dogs right now, so it's pretty quiet place. how would you classify that?
Yeah, this is pretty rural. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a lane that there are cars over there, of course, driving. So my dog is walking to heel like religiously over there, right? There is nothing else to do. Then I have to cross the road if I will go like that way. And then I will cross that road usually in the middle position, right? So I don't really do the sit. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but for my lifestyle right now with my dog,
No,
it doesn't make much sense.
I've not really bothered with this, but I've thought about it recently because I was walking Onyx around a suburb and I had her on a flexi lead. That's your influence. So she was out ahead of me and she's just exploring. And of course, she's a dog. She doesn't differentiate between like road and curb. And it's a really quiet area, so it wasn't like dangerous or anything. But there were times where she would take the step into the road and I would be like, and then that made me think like, maybe I should teach her not to do that. But I can just tell her slow and she'll stop. But
you can adjust to whatever your needs are. Like as a general rule, I will teach my dog like 5 skills, and those 5 skills, 5 behaviors will, give me answers for 99.9% of real life situations. Right, and then I will use them accordingly where I live. And if your dog knows how to walk to heel and come back and a couple of other things, you can implement those in your walks and build those like strong associations regardless where you live.
So the game that I was talking about, where you're getting the dog to sit, and we started talking about the jumping up and stuff like that. Are there other games or even other variations of that game that you tend to use regularly?
Explain that a little bit more.
Do you remember like how we were talking about, I said the game I was playing with a Doberman where I would play with him a little bit and then I'd withhold the toy. If he would sit, then he would get...
Okay, I do a lot of like heel work to the toy, away from the toy. Same with the food, heel work to the food or away from the food. Rico from the food, Rico from the toy. So I'm basing a lot of my game in the play, and that's why I'm so obsessed about building a very valuable play event with the food and with the toys, because that gives me a lot of how do I say that? Like, that gives me so much creativity how I can later apply that. Like if my dog can, if I will make my dog like super motivated for a toy, right? And then again, I want my dog to be 100% excited about the dead toy that is lying on the ground. That's why in my playing strategy, I pay a lot of attention to create active dog toward the passive object, right? Because very often we have the dog relax with we have the dog in one hand, like the toy in the other hand, everybody are relaxed, and then you need to put so much stimulation to actually get the dog interested in play. And some of the dogs are reacting to it like beautifully, but some of the dogs you have to work hard in order to get them, in the mood for a play, right? But then that puts a lot of limitation how I can train, because if my dog is 100% or 120% like in the mood for a game, like we are coming back to the arousal levels are going up through the roof, or even by the scent of the toy, right? If I will place that toy on the ground and I will practice, for example, heel work, recalls, and so on things. Let's say I will send the dog to that toy and then call him halfway. Later on, I'm not gonna have like problem to like heel the dog to the park, where usually they pull towards you, right? Or recall the dog from the chase, because I can practice that in very much controlled scenario and I can put repetitions in.
How much attention do you pay to the reinforcement rates in terms of how so for example, very common leave it training advice is don't let the dog have the thing that they're leaving, because you don't want that expectation, and then you walk past a kebab on the floor and the dog leaves it and then they're like diving on it because they're expecting that as the reward. How does that come into this kind of training? Like, do you pay attention to, hey, I want my dog to mostly be getting the reward from me, or like we just don't really care, or like how do you...
I will reward from both. Like really, like we were talking about frustration. I don't want my dog to be disappointed. I want, and then that you mentioned Sapolsky recently, right? And then, like he said that if you will add the question mark, that brings the dopamine levels, like shoots them up through the roof, right? So if my dog will have like maybe I will get that, or maybe I will get another thing, or maybe I'm not gonna get anything, right? I think there is huge benefit from it. I wouldn't, like, oh, you don't reward the dog like from the living things ever, never, because then you can create disappointment. Depends on the dog, of course.
Yeah, and again, probably is contextual, because I think like that makes sense when you're getting the dog to leave the kebab on the floor, but when you're actually trying to use the toy as a way of teaching impulse control, maybe that's not so beneficial.
Once again, so
like that advice, it makes sense if your only goal is to get the dog to leave the kebab that's on the floor that you're walking past. But maybe it doesn't make so much sense if you're using the toy on the ground as an impulse.
Like, look at the dog's perception. If the dog knows, okay, I have to leave that thing, and I'm not gonna get it, and I'm gonna get something else, and has like clear like expectation what that is, this is where you can create some opposition from the dog, I think. Because like if the dog knows like I'm leaving that kebab and I'm gonna get the kibble, the dog may say like, fuck it.
I know what you're saying.
If you will ask the dog, leave the kebab, and the dog like, I may get the kebab, right? Most likely the dog will follow, I think.
I think the problem that comes with that sometimes, though, is you get the leave it, and then the dog is like, oh, good, I've won the reward. And then they're trying to come back for it.
It's just your training is fucking poor. Just complete the training process, right? That means the dog is not ready to leave the kebab yet. And that's really it. Because the dog should wait for the signal. Or if you will do both things, it's not going to be a surprise for the dog, and the dog will listen. Like, what am I getting?
So in this situation, presumably you're going to use different markers to mean you're getting the food from me versus you're allowed to have the thing on the floor.
If you are creative, you can make so many markers. Let's say food from the hand, food from the floor, toy from the hand, toy from the ground, toy forward, toy behind, right? Especially in dog sports.
There is something to be said, though, for teaching the dog that some things are just off the table. Like some things you're just not going to get. So
with the predation, I will call my dog reliably from chasing animals, but he never gets them, right? And then, I will give or will not give him a toy.
I like listening to different styles of training, things that, I might not necessarily be into myself. But so I've kind of, one of my favorite podcasts, even though I have no aspirations to do gun dog stuff, is a lady called Jo Lauren's podcast called The Force Free Gun Dog. And she has this really interesting, I hope that I get this right, but she talks about how it's the way that you raise a dog. If, say, you have a young pointer and you want to do gun dog training, it's very different if you're going to use like a e-collar or something like that later on versus if you're not. And because if you are, and you can use suppression and different, you can use different strategies, then you can allow the dog to get crazy about pheasants or birds or whatever, and you have more ability to control that later. Versus if you're not going to do that, then instead you want to have the impulse control and etc. way earlier, and be building it up alongside the dog's drive, and that. So it's interesting how like those different, like, it's an interesting example of different approaches, and I think for pet people especially, it makes a lot of sense with I think maybe even arguably for pretty much anyone that has a pet, I think just anyone really, when it comes to talking about predatory behavior, it makes sense right from the beginning to just not even get into that with the dog.
Oh, yeah.
There are some dogs you will get away with it with. I mean, how many dogs that go to the park and they chase squirrels, but they're not that mad about it. It doesn't cause the owners any problem. But you're kind of opening Pandora's box, and it's like some dogs you can get away with that with. But some dogs is going to cause you so many problems, it's not worth it.
Yeah, just to give you an example, like when I was raising my dog, and I mentioned that I can give him a lot of freedom. He can do whatever fuck he wants on the walks, and I can forget about him, and he will be always coming back. But for the first 2 or 3 years, I think he wasn't even aware of the existence of wild animals. Because like wherever I was going with him, I played, interaction, like focus on me, we are having great time, and so on and so on. And the play was a very big part of it, right? So like in quote, like I don't think he was aware of their existence, right? Later on, of course, my girlfriend, she took him for a run, and he chased after the rabbit and killed him. And since then, it's like a different dog. Like he never got the same, because like beforehand he wasn't really bothered, but right now like he's thinking about that, and he would chase. But you know, like as long as I'm rewarding him with the play, I can reliably call him back. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you know you don't want the dog to think about that and let the dog to experience those things, because if it goes for predation, apparently there is like different neurological pathway. It's not really like a play. So I think if the dog experiences that like early on, it's going to be much harder.
Much harder, yeah, definitely. I realized I said Joe's podcast name wrong. It's called Hold the Line. So yeah, just shout outs to that. Another thing, you know, I've heard Joe talk about is like how you have to, and this comes into the play, this is going to sound really familiar to you, but like different dogs find different parts of that reinforcing. So let's just say in a hypothetical world, you have a dog that you have those two different puppies. You have the puppy that chases like pigeons or whatever, and one of them continues to chase the pigeons for a while, realizes they can't catch them, and then just stops chasing pigeons. Yeah. And the other one, like, it just becomes more and more hooked on chasing pigeons. And it's like, I think that speaks to like what the dog finds reinforcing. You know, maybe the first puppy is a dog that finds the catching and the getting the pigeon as the reinforcing thing, and the chasing is just a means to an end. And thus, if we just let them chase pigeons, it doesn't cause problem, right? I'm not saying I would ever take that gamble, but it doesn't cause the dog an issue. Versus the second puppy finds the chasing so reinforcing. I mean, how many dogs are obsessed with chasing squirrels, have never caught one?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and if you look at this, you can use those principles that get us in trouble, and you can use to work them, to make them work in your favor. You can use like similar thing to build passion for the game. And then, you know, it's always good. A thing is to help yourself with the prey sequence. And there are like several stages or several things in the prey sequence. And you can look at your dog and look what is rewarding, right? Maybe it's an eye, maybe it's the chase, maybe it's like grab and bite, right? And you can help yourself to adjust your play strategy so you can bring those good feelings about the game.
Before we started recording, you kind of hinted that there were things in the mainstream about managing arousal that you disagreed with. You didn't tell me what. I'm just curious.
Did I? Like it was hour and a half ago, and you're asking me about one thing.
What are things that you hear people say that you think no, I don't agree with that?
It's just like keeping arousal down, or trying to push that arousal down as a first line of dealing with the arousal. And this is something what I do differently. And we have that the thing that represents the optimal performance versus arousal, right? So we're gonna post that somewhere, maybe on our Instagram, this diagram, right? So there is a certain level of arousal that will create the best performance, right? Regardless if it's a dog sport, regardless if it's live, right? And if the dog is less aroused, will not perform as good, or more aroused, that's gonna compromise the performance. What I'm trying to do is expand this like spectrum of the best performance from my dog if it goes in arousal. So I want my dog to be able to think and perform well when that arousal is much, much higher. Right? So this is what I'm trying to accomplish. That's why, for example, if we are looking at the dog sport, like my dog will work better on the new field with new distractions, with the new decoy that is strange, so that is adding to that, and then he's like much more aroused. My dog performs in those scenarios better. My dog will heal more without the reward. My dog will, bite harder, etc., right? So this is what I'm trying to accomplish, rather than just make the dog calmer. Because let's say if you are facing something new, and novelty will create the spike of arousal, right? That's why, for example, we have social norms, so we can save the energy. Because like if something is familiar and known and you can predict the outcomes, like we are fine. Mother Nature, or we create a social norm so we can save the energy, right? But if it's a novelty, you will have that spike of arousal because you have to process that data, right? And, act accordingly, right? So very often let's say you are training agility and your dog is running perfect on the field that the dog knows, but then you will go to new place with new noises and new things, and the dog's arousal goes up. You mentioned trigger stacking, right? And the dog's performance is compromised. So that's why I want to extend that spectrum where my dog is performing to the highest level.
No, I think that makes total sense. It's the same with human sports. I think sometimes if you can get so engrossed in whatever sport you're playing that you don't really hear the coach or whatever, versus having the presence of mind to be able to still take on board, the coach shouting advice or whatever's going on around you. So,
but I think this is what we call performing good under pressure or under stress, right? Where a lot of people, they will fall apart, but also I can see that in dogs that they, we bring the sport, for example, will bring the arousal to a certain level, and then you have those new noises, new people, etc., that will add to it, and that can compromise the performance, or your dog can still perform in that higher arousal state of mind.
Yeah, really, really interesting chat. Anyway,
good. Okay,
is there anything you want to push people to, or anywhere that?
No, we're gonna go back, and you have to promise me that we're gonna we'll do deep dive into reactivity and coping behaviors, right? We don't have time for it. We went long anyway, but I would like to get.
We do a whole episode just on reactivity for sure.
We'll do.
Yeah, totally.
Good. Okay, let's go train dogs. Bye.